Okay, so we have to finish. We have to do today with the theory of aggregate supply, what we already have done, or the theory of aggregate demand, and that is provide two basic things. Show what is the shape or the position of the aggregate supply curve to explain briefly what is aggregate supply. That's one thing. Another thing, we need to show the factors that help explain so aggregate supply is the topic for today. And we will say something eventually at the end, at the very end, about the concept of equilibrium between aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So we're gonna first, as I said, define the aggregate supply as a concept, define the position of the aggregate supply curve, and then explain two things with regard to the mentioned curve. Which factors influence movement along the given curve? Why the curve, in other words, is upward slope? This is the position we know that in the basic theory of supply. When we have the price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis, the most supply curves are upward sloping depending on price. If price increases, the supply of the good will increase. This is macroeconomic analysis. That means that we retain the CPI as the vertical price axis. So it's not the price of any one individual good, it's the general price level on the vertical axis. It's real GDP on the horizontal axis. Let's see. We know that the real GDP is equivalent to the quantity of goods and services produced because real GDP is measured in constant prices. So real GDP doesn't depend on prices. When you say that real GDP increases, you actually say that quantity of goods and services increases. So now we're not talking about quantity of goods and services demanded anymore, but quantity of goods and services produced. So now we're looking at the economy from the supply side, from the producer side. How does the economy react to changes in prices and changes in other factors with regard to production? One more complication here that we didn't have to face with the theory of aggregate demand is actually that there is a crucial distinction between the short-run and long run situation with regard to the aggregate supply curve. This particular curve that I have drawn here is the short run aggregate supply curve. And we will see later on that for the reasons that remain to be explained later on, the long run aggregate supply curve is vertical. The quantity of goods and services produced in the long run do not depend on price variations. So let's start with the short run curve first. Just by eyeballing the curve, you see, what does it tell you? What can you tell me about when you look at this curve? In the short run, what happens? If price changes, if price level increases, production increases. So it seems to suggest that in the short run, actually, inflation is good for the economy. Higher price level will lead in the short run to higher real GDP, and vice versa. Lower price level will lead to lower real GDP, lower production. Whereas in the long run, it doesn't matter whether price level is here or here, the quantity of services produced will be the same. Okay, so that's the basic definition. Now, to to explain why is that the case? Why in the short run it seems like you can buy slightly higher economic growth by higher inflation, and vice versa, that if you have a deflation, it seems that you're going to pay a short-term price in lower production, lower productivity. Let's see. CPI 1, which is lower, you have real GDP 1, which is relatively low, the price level has gone up, the quantity produced at that price level has gone up as well. What explains that? Two things primarily here. Number one, something called in the economic theory charmingly sticky wages. So stickiness of wages and prices is one of the important technical concepts in macroeconomics. It refers to the fact that some prices, including prices of some types of labor, are fixed by long-term contracts. So that means your wage, you sign a contract for 3 years, and your wage in nominal terms is fixed at whatever, $60,000 per year. And you're participating in production of whatever, your factory, your mechanical engineer working in a car factory. So then the variations in demand for the final good will happen all the time. The variations in revenue will happen all the time, but your wage is fixed. You're going to get whatever you signed. If the demand for the final good decreases, your wage will not go down. That's the character of why is this the case? Why people accept to sign long-term wage contracts? Both sides have a certain interest in doing so. On the one hand, employers like predictability. You can calculate your cost of production more easily if you know what your labor costs will be. That's a valuable information. From a standpoint of workers, it's also good for you. You can make your own plans, financial or otherwise, if you know what your income is going to be. If it doesn't depend on the daily vagaries of demand and the decisions that the manager or the owner of the company will be making every single day. So there is a demand for stability and predictability. So that's one of the main reasons why people like fixed wages. There are other reasons that are not so good. The trade unions actually increase increase the stickiness of wages. Sign a contract with the union, it's very difficult to reduce wages once the economic conditions deteriorate. If it's my own individual negotiation with an employer, it's much easier, it's much more likely that I'm going to accept if you're faced with a trade-off between being fired and getting 5% reduction in my wage. It's very likely that I'm going to accept 5% reduction. Last year, when we had this very big recession, the employees of the University of Mary are not unionized. So we were told, actually, as of now, you don't need to cut your wages, but if situation deteriorates further, sorry, folks, you don't have to. In order to retain everybody on the payroll, we don't have to cut wages across the board. So that's easier to do when you are not unionized, because if you had the trade unions, there would be all hell would break loose if something like that was mentioned. So the trade unions further decrease the flexibility of wages that are already to some degree inflexible because people want them to be inflexible. People want predictability. Okay. So that's the reason why wages do not change as much as they could or as they should in some types of situations. How does that affect the aggregate supply? Imagine now that you employ whatever 1,000 workers at a wage of $3 per hour. And let's say the CPI is 150. So that means that the real wage is 20 bucks. Divided by the real wage. It's 20 bucks. So,
how did you get the 20?
Because the constant dollars, 100 is irrelevant. You want to calculate the real wage, so you divide it by, see, by 1/3. You reduce it by 1/3.
Oh.
150. You want to calculate the income at the price level of 100. Reduce 30 by 10 by 1/3. Convert the nominal wage into real wage. So bear in mind here, when you are paying wages, when you're paying your labor cost, what counts is the real wage, not the nominal. So then you make a long-term contract for 3 years as an employer, and you expect the price level to remain stable at 150. The $30 that you pay in 2021 will be worth $20 in constant dollars, in constant terms, in 2023. Now, what happens is that the inflation goes down, actually, that the price level drops, let's say, to 120. So now what happens here? Who benefits? Keep on, as they say. Worker benefits. You get the same nominal, your nominal income, your wages are fixed. $30 per hour in nominal terms. The real value of those $30 in 2021 was $20. But now, after a year, the price level dropping down, the wage will not be worth $20 anymore, but something like 23 or 24. The purchasing power of your $30 will increase. Okay? So that's good for you. You can now buy more goods and services than before, but it's bad for the employer. Why is it bad for the employer? The price level drops. The revenue goes down. Your stuff, whatever you're producing, you are selling now for less. So now, ideally, what you would like to do would be to reduce wages, reduce the nominal wage to account for the price inflation, for the price deflation, rather, the drop in the price, but you cannot do it. So what can you do? That's a situation, imagine that our administration in Humeri could reduce wages, demand. Our revenue is going down because less students are applying for the university because of the pandemic. They're scared to go, their parents will not let them go to North Dakota, Bismarck, and so on. So what can you do? So ideally, you would like to cut wages, to cut nominal wages. But if you cannot do it, what's the alternative? Cut production.
Yeah, cut positions.
Cut positions, cut production. Reduce services. You fire 3% of people, you eliminate 3% of possible goods and services that you produce. So that's one of the reasons why a drop in the price level will lead to a drop in productivity level, because of the stickiness of wages. You cannot adjust wages by lowering their nominal value. If you cannot do that, you will have to fire some people in order to remain financially solvent. If you cut the labor force, you have to cut production, so real GDP will So that's typically what happens in a recession. That's one of the main problems. Especially in the heavily unionized private sectors, it's very difficult to overcome the resistance of the fixed rigid wages, sticky wages. Then you have a higher rate of unemployment. So that's one possible reason why you can have with a drop in the price level, you have a tendency for production to decrease because unemployment. And you may think to yourself that the opposite would apply equally. When the price level increases, that then the stickiness of wages will allow people to increase production. That happens as well, but to a lesser degree. Because the wages are more flexible upward. People are more ready to, the price level increase, my wage has to go up as well. So people are much more likely to accept an increase in wages and the price level increase than they're ready to accept a decrease in wages and the price level goes down. But in principle, it's similar should be, at least in theory, apply to the upward. So that's one of the reasons why there is this proportionate relationship between the price level and the real GDP. The second reason is slightly different. It has to do with the perceptions, or rather misperceptions of workers. Imagine now that the wages are flexible, that they change. Go on. And imagine that the price level increases. So there is a direct proportionate relationship between how high the wages are and how many people want to work. So if the price level increases, the nominal wages will increase. But now, as this is happening, people don't know, people can think that, or they can guess that the price level will increase as well. And that their higher nominal wages will not be higher in real terms, but they don't know that. If they misperceive this relationship, if people think their wages are increasing faster than the price level, which can happen very often, then they will be under an illusion that their real wages are higher than they are. So your nominal wage increases 5%. You know that the price level is going to increase somewhat. But if you believe that the price level is going to increase only 2%, and you get a 5% wage increase, then you're going to be ready to work more. Now, more people will be willing to work because they would believe falsely that the wages are high. In real terms, that they are. And vice versa. If the nominal wages are decreasing, and people believe that they're decreasing faster than the price level, people will withdraw labor much more than the economic conditions require. That's a separate reason why you have this relationship: higher price level, higher the quantity of goods and services. Because people may perceive. I'm not saying that this is always going to happen, that this is always going to happen to the same degree in all the sectors of the economy, but very often it happens. It's called a monetary illusion. You'll analyze that later on, much later. That people live under the illusion that their nominal incomes are higher in real terms than they are, and they're ready to work more and produce more. But that's only in the short term. Bear in mind. You cannot keep going with that magic forever. Once you realize that actually the prices have increased 5%, not 2%, and that your higher nominal income in real terms is the same, you can buy the same amount of goods and services as before, you're going to say, oh, I'm working more now to get the same thing. Why would I be doing that? And then the economy will start going, production will start decreasing, because people will start working less. So this second scenario is based, we relax the sticky wages, we simplify the situation. We can say the wages fluctuate freely up and down depending on the demand and supply. We say, what if people misperceive the relationship between their nominal wages, the rate of increase in their nominal wages and the rate of increase in price level? Okay, so these two factors are two independent factors determining this upward position of the short-run aggregate supply curve, shows by the price level and the quantity produced vary always in the same direction. Why there? When the price level increases, then GDP will increase in the short run. Any questions as well? Everything okay? But now, movement of the entire supply curve. Which factors now? Movement along a given curve is changes in the quantity produced that are caused only by a variation in the price level. That's what we've been talking about as well. Now we move to what can change an entire curve to shift left or right, or to put it differently. Now we assume that the price level is constant, and we see other things, or we look at other things that can change, that can affect the change in the relativity. If you assume that the price level is fixed at 150 for 5 years, what else can happen that can cause a variation in relativity? Which will be shown that as a shift to the right on our short-run curve, or shift to the left. So there are a variety of things here that can influence shifts in the aggregate supply. The first one is wages. Wages can change for all kinds of reasons, up or down. Quantity of, let's say, the number of workers increasing in the United States, more liberal immigration policies, we have 5 million people more. How is that going to affect the wage rates? This is the labor market. This is demand. This is supply. You increase the number of people, increase supply, wages go down. This is the old wage. This is the new wage. This is the old quantity of labor. This is new. So more people work at the lower wage. How will that affect the aggregate supply curve? Everything else remains constant, only wages go down. You see, this is the supply curve. This is the equilibrium, the intersection of the old supply curve and the demand curve. We assume that the demand curve remains the same. Now you bring in 5 million new people here, the supply of labor increases. This shown as a shift of the supply curve to the right. The new intersection of the new supply curve and the old demand curve is over here. So you see that The result of that is that the wages go down slightly and the quantity of labor, the number of people who work will increase. How will that affect the short-run aggregate supply curve? So remember, everything else remains the same. Price level and all other possible factors that could potentially have influenced the production will not change. Will not change. It's such a rigor if I'm looking at this rigor. Any ideas? Look at the process from an individual entrepreneur's point of view. Would you like to have your wages go down, everything else remaining the same, including your revenue? Higher profit margin, but you can make more stuff. You can produce more. So wages go down. In real terms, that's good for the business. Long run. That means it goes up. Supply curve shifts to the right. Wages go up. 10 million Americans decide to emigrate to Canada because they don't like the president. That happens every 4 years. Millions of people are threatening via Twitter, irrespective of who the president is, that they're going to emigrate someplace, and nobody does it. But let's say that they're serious. Whoever, our Republicans, Texas, they don't hate body communist Bolshevik Joe Biden, so concentration camps, and they go to Canada. They go not to Canada, but to Russia. Their friend one Putin, 10 million. Trump supporters don't want to live in the United States anymore. Wage rates will go up. Now, fewer people remaining. Here, wages go up. What happens to the short-term aggregate supply curve? Moves to the left. Higher wages, higher costs of production, lower the margin between the revenue and cost. Bad for the business. Wages go up. Aggregate supply goes down. Okay. The next one is slightly tricky. Prices of non-labor inputs, which means other inputs that are used in the process of production beyond labor, such as capital goods and raw materials and machines and stuff like that. Non-labor inputs. If those prices go up, what's going to happen to short-term aggregate supply? So here, in your book, they're not quite precise about what they mean by this. It could mean what they assume here, that the short-term aggregate supply will go down if prices go up. They move in the opposite direction. So you have other goods and services. You imagine now the wages are stable. Nobody's immigrating or emigrating to the United States, and the conditions of the labor market is fixed. Nominal and real wages are the same as they are, so we can control for that variable. But now, whatever prices of steel and aluminum increase dramatically. What's going to happen to short-run aggregate supply? Yeah. The costs are increasing. The same thing, the same logic as in the previous case, actually. The costs, whatever the reason for costs to increase, the short-run aggregate supply curve would have gone down. But there is one proviso, one limitation in this case. This will hold true for as long as those non-labor inputs, whatever they might be, the raw materials, machinery, and so on, are complementary factors of production to the labor, which means that they're necessary to produce in tandem with labor, that they're necessary tools for producing goods and services, that they're in current use by the laborers. And if their price increases, then of course a worker will be capable of producing less because the employer will have to pay higher cost. So this applies only if those non-labor inputs we're talking about are complementary factors. But what if there are potential substitutes for labor? Let's say some new machine that can replace a McDonald's worker. There are substitutes. It's also non-labor input in some production process, but it is a such non-labor input that could be used in an alternative production process to replace the labor. As it happens all the time, replacing labor with technology. What's going to happen then to short-term aggregate supply? If the price of some substitute technology, some technology or equipment or machinery that could be used instead of the existing labor goes down. Will be the same or different?
It'll go up. It'll go up
It will go up. Why?
because if the substitute has less, it's gonna need more of that one.
It will go up, but it is more complicated because you cannot now precisely calculate what's going to happen to the demand for labor, what the final result will be. Would there be any difference, in your view, no? between the situation when the factor of production is complementary or not, for the macroeconomy, for the economy as a whole? Okay, we'll leave it at that. With the complementary factors, it's clear and easy that those factors are already locked in. They could be used only in tandem with labor. In substitutes, it's not quite clear what's going to happen because you will have now to use the new machinery and equipment in tandem with a different kind of labor. So now it depends what your labor costs in the new situation will be. If those labor costs are unchanged as compared to the previous situation, then you would be right, the aggregate supply will increase. But if your labor costs are 20% higher and you save 10% and the price of machinery and equipment goes down 10%, then your total cost will be higher. See, let's say if you have to replace, you have a manual worker who uses spatula and whatever, some simple tool of production to make a hamburger, and then you replace that production process with a machine that produces a hamburger that costs you 50% less than the spatula and other tools that this worker is using. But then you need a worker to maintain that machine that costs you 70% more than the manual worker. Then your total cost will be higher. So you cannot, if it substitutes, you cannot quite clearly say what's going to happen if a price of a non-labor input goes down. So that's one limitation. You have to account then what happens with the labor cost in this situation. If labor cost goes down or increases less than goes down or remains stable, then you are fine. But if it increases, then it's not very great. Okay, so this relationship applies only to the complementary factors of production. You have a production process, and the price of a spatula goes down, your cost per hamburger will go down. You know that. Or grill, or whatever non-labor inputs are used. Okay. Productivity. Productivity goes up. So what is productivity? The number of units that the worker can produce per unit of time. The number of product units that the worker can make per unit of time. There's now some nuance in physical productivity and value productivity. I think you need to go on that. Wow. So what was the difference? The physical productivity is the number of units, value productivity would be the revenue that you make. So if you assume that prices are fixed, then there is no difference between value productivity and physical productivity. I mean, there is no difference in changes in value productivity. If price per unit is $2 fixed, you increase physical production by 5 units per unit in time per hour, then nothing changes. It's going to be $10. But then if the price increases to 2.5, then it's more complicated. Value productivity increases faster than physical. But let's say for now that we are talking about fixed value productivity. How would that affect? What can cause productivity, physical productivity to increase? Can you give me a couple of examples? We're talking about physical productivity of labor. How much one single worker can produce. Can you give me a couple of examples?
New technology?
Yeah, new technology. You're working with a better machine, you can make more. What else? New techniques. New techniques, so better knowledge. How to utilize technology. So fracking, one thing is a new technology, but then a new techniques of using fracking will reduce the costs even more. So improving the way how you use the existing technology. What else?
Changes in company policy.
Changes in
company policy.
Company policy. What do you mean by company policy?
Like say they needed like when a company decides to change its way of its methods or like its habits of producing something.
Okay, methods, habits, okay. So internal organization of the firm. Even if technology doesn't change, as an example, Henry Ford. What did he do? He didn't change technology very much. What he changed was the technique, method of production. Or it's an internal organization. Or better managing the firm. So we have this survey which was made in Great Britain, just one of the many examples. So you have a British run firm, an American firm with the American management and American corporate governance, the way how they run the firm. And we have the same workers at the same level of education, the same level of competence, operating in the same field, the same laws, everything is the same, and American firms are 20 to 30% more productive per worker. Why? Because of better management techniques transplanted to the United States. So the management techniques, improvements in how you run a firm, actually. You can have 4 of us working in a firm. If a person doesn't know our strengths and weaknesses and complementarities and how best to utilize the talents of every one of us, we can produce 30-40% less than if you are properly utilized. Not overworked, not underworked, not given the proper tasks and so on, controlled, monitored in a proper way. So this also increases or decreases physical and value. So what is the relationship that whatever the reason if productivity goes up, either for technological or organizational reasons, the short-run aggregate supply will go up as well. But it's a proportionate relationship. And vice versa, of course, productivity goes down. Imagine that we forget that the entire mechanical engineering knowledge acquired in the last 50 years disappears. So the short-run aggregate supply curve swing widely to the left. That's what happened in the Roman Empire disintegrated. Image of Germanic and Slavic barbarians sitting amidst the ruins, looking at the buildings that they didn't have any freaking idea how they were built. The knowledge, civilization was completely lost. It's the Dark Ages. 500 years until the beginning of the medieval period. That was it. Productivity has gone almost to zero because the knowledge about how to make stuff was disappeared. Because the people who didn't know anything actually overwhelmed and destroyed civilized society. That's another way how productivity can go down. So everything is still here. The building was here. Raw materials are here. Even machines might be here. If you give me a machine if you give me a computer that does something useful, it is right. Productivity. Okay, supply shocks. That's the last one. Yeah, we have time. Supply shocks. So what are supply shocks? Those are some sudden, unpredicted changes in the conditions affecting production. Could be beneficial or positive supply shocks or adverse or negative supply shocks. One example would be bad weather, bad harvest. So if our economy depends on whatever corn production, and the Midwest weather is nasty and the corn yield is decimated, that will move the aggregate supply curve, short-run aggregate supply curve to the left. That's simply part of the quantity usually that we usually produce that will disappear. So that's an adverse supply shock. So if now it's difficult to picture this. Let's say if it's this means it doesn't mean that it's a big supply shock. Negative means it's a positive supply shock. For example, good weather. That aggregate supply curve would go upwards, or negative supply shock. What would be another positive supply shock? The discovery of new oil reserves. That will put the prices of oil down, reduce the costs, increase productivity. And vice versa. If we discover that oil reserves tomorrow are percent-wise could be low, and it will be drop. The aggregate supply. How would you can you speculate from the invention of the SARS-CoV vaccines? What is that? How does that affect aggregate supply? How would that affect it? You just saw yesterday the new recommendation by CDC, Center for Disease Control, that people who receive or who are fully vaccinated don't need to isolate anymore in quarantine when they come into contact with somebody who was infected. Essentially, you get vaccinated, you're free to go to do whatever you want. You can go back, find out, go back to normal life. How will that affect aggregate supply? And is there any of these four factors that you can classify that you can subsume the COVID vaccine? Is it a supply shock? Maybe. Increasing productivity? Maybe. You see, no classification is perfect. So. Or maybe that's a demand side. Think of it that way. There's a variety of things, everything that affects decisions of people to produce one more unit of a good. You have the ability to shift the aggregate supply curve. Long run aggregate supply curve. It's vertical. That means that you cannot change in the long run. What does it mean actually? That in the long run, you can forget about price effects. The only factors that influence the aggregate supply in the long run are those factors, are real factors. In the long run, only productivity, wages, supply shocks, prices of the factors of production, real stuff. In the long run, only the real factors influence how much we can produce. In the short run, price level can influence productivity. In the long run, only the real factors. We'll come back to this. I'm just giving you the first inkling of that. We will come back to this analysis later. Also, you can make a graph like this. So you have short run aggregate supply curve. So you can have actually two different equilibria. Now we're talking about last minute equilibrium, macroeconomic equilibrium is situation where demand and supply are equal. That aggregate supply equals aggregate demand. But if short-run aggregate supply doesn't, as it doesn't here, the same as the long-run aggregate supply, then you can have two different macroeconomic long-run. And we will see next week and in the weeks to come how is this solved, how is this gap, what kind of gaps may exist between short-run and the long-run. Just one more thing. This means obviously the vertical nature, the vertical position of the long-run aggregate supply curve means at every price level, whatever the price level, the real GDP is the same. That's what it means to say that the price level doesn't affect it. Whatever the price level, productivity will be the same in the long run. And only real factors. Okay, final questions? Okay, so stay alive over the weekend, stay warm, and I'll see you all on Wednesday. So we don't have a class.